Hi, my name is Tack, military analyst at Stratfor, and I'm joined here today by Paul Floyd, another military analyst at Stratfor, to talk about the Battle of Tikrit and where that actually puts us in the Iraqi conflict right now. So, Paul, we've seen the whole battle play out with the Iraqi security forces regaining control over the city of Tikrit. Can you tell us what exactly happened there, what the big lessons from that offensive are?
Well, it started off with the Iraqi security forces partnered or joined by a very small element of Sunni tribal elements and a very large element of Shia militias, which made up the bulk of the force on the ground. And it kicked off kind of without U.S. coalition support. And because of that, the U.S. coalition did not provide air support during this operation. So it was this combination of Iranian advisors with their Shia militias, backed by Iraqi security forces, all moving into Tikrit. They surrounded Tikrit and using artillery bombardments and house-to-house clearing, kind of slowly but surely tried to encroach on the city and displace and kill IS. What we saw was that kind of just stagnated. That only got them so far, and there was lots of casualties from that type of fighting. So that force stopped having success. So at some point through some negotiations, the U.S. coalition decided that it would actually weigh in at helping Baghdad specifically. This caused a schism between some of the Shia militias who refused to participate if the U.S. coalition was in the lead. And so that's probably the biggest single point that we saw actually is that schism of the Shia militias trying to work with the U.S.-led coalition. But ultimately, the coalition airstrikes were able to do enough damage to the IS positions that remained in the center of the city, and the Iraqi security forces and some of the Shia militias were able to push in and finally take the city completely.
So where does that put us in relation to the larger offensive within Iraq? Because obviously the Islamic State still holds a lot of positions, both north of Tikrit towards Mosul, as well as in the Anbar province. What is the next move for the Iraqi security forces, and how does this schism that you talk about between the U.S.-supported side and the Shiite-dominated side, how does that play out in a continuation of this offensive?
Well, the two big places, as you mentioned, that are left are Anbar province down the Euphrates River Valley and Nineveh province up the Tigris River Valley. And both those places are almost predominantly, the areas that are left over are predominantly Sunni-controlled areas. So this causes a problem when you talk about the Shia militia participation going on in the future. And there's a strategic fork in the road. Do we continue to push north, where we already have forces up the Tigris River Valley, on from Mosul, through Baji, all the way up to Mosul? Or do we concentrate on Anbar province? Because Anbar province, IS positions in both Ramadi and Fallujah are very, very close to Baghdad and kind of represent a much more direct threat to Baghdad through proximity. So what we're seeing right now is this conflict playing out with all the different stakeholders who have forces in Iraq are all lobbying for their own, what they think will support their own self-interest. So we've seen some politicians in the Baghdad government. We've seen some of the Shia militias all arguing, saying we need to push towards Anbar province. Also, the Anbar provincial council and some of the Sunni tribes there are also calling for that. But similarly, we're seeing some of the U.S. advisors reportedly are also arguing that we should continue north towards Mosul. There's Kurdish interest to say keep pushing towards the north towards Mosul, and not to mention the Nineveh provincial council and a lot of the Sunni tribes up there are also arguing for pushing up north. So we're really at this very stark fork in the road. And this broad anti-ISIS coalition is under enormous strain now politically to hold together as everyone's lobbying for these different events or these different strategic paths.
So there's definitely a political discussion or decision-making process going on where they want to take this next. But what about the military capabilities and constraints on the ground? Because obviously the U.S. is still preparing forces for Mosul. There are certain forces that are able to operate in Anbar, others that aren't. What is the situation there? What can they actually do? How far can they push this, like right now?
Well, I'd say that right now what you're going to see is they're going to continue to clear out the Saladin province, which is right around Tikrit, and maybe some of the areas over in Kirkuk province near Kirkuk city itself, around the city of Hawija, where there's a big IS pocket. And that's kind of the easy answer that everyone can kind of still agree on, where the forces are still in place, and that can be done in the near term. Clearing out Anbar or Mosul is a much more of a long-term process. The U.S. coalition is still training Iraqi security forces. They have 2 battalions right now out of the 5 total to be trained up. We also know that at this time, IS is digging in at Mosul, and we've had reports of them, digging trenches, putting up concrete barriers, stashing food, calling all fighters back to Mosul. But that actually works both ways, where that actually incentivizes the drive north in some ways, because they're saying the longer we sit here, the more resources they'll have to defend Mosul. And look how bad we did in Tikrit in the sense of house-to-house clearing and the casualties incurred by the security forces. Look what Mosul's going to be. It's going to be times 10. It's the second largest city in Iraq and the single biggest IS-held city in the entire region. So that looks like it's going to be a huge monster, tough nut to crack. And because of that the other side of this argument, because of that, is no, take our time, continue to build up our forces, worry about Saladin province, worry about Anbar, continue to hold the line there, just push some forces down there. Let's train some of the Sunni tribal elements down in Anbar and arm them and have them help us fight down there while we continue to kind of really build up the formal forces for the taking of Mosul and continue to slowly drive north.
Somewhere in there, you mentioned the preparations taking place at Mosul. So you talked about concrete barriers, trenches, stocking food. We've also seen similar defenses being built in Tikrit, where most notably the improvised explosive device threat really slowed down the advance of the Iraqi security forces. So how much is Tikrit a learning experience for the Iraqi offensive, where that potentially helps them to perform better once they do tackle Mosul, or are there certain things that were noticed during the offensive in Tikrit that show us how they will do in Mosul?
I think the two most notable things that came out of Tikrit, tactically speaking, on the ground were, IS uses IED saturation on the ground, and they use what is called snipers, but basically long-range marksmanship in some form or another, to incur casualties, to cause attrition. And so a small number of estimated fires, usually in the hundreds is what most estimates were able to hold out in a small urban pocket for a very long time and cause disproportionate casualties for the Iraqi security forces and the Shia militias. That being said, that was because they didn't have the Iraqi security forces and the Shia militias were not utilizing precision-guided munitions from the air, mostly just artillery and kind of mass bombardments, but they really couldn't crack fortified positions in the urban environments. So I think what they learned is that you need that precision-guided munitions to help crack those fortified positions in urban environments, and that they do need U.S. coalition support, because of the air power provided and some of the equipment provided to help them clear IEDs, some of the EOD teams that get direct training from the U.S. coalition. They need that support. But they also need the manpower that comes with the Shia militias to a certain degree, which are kind of conflicting interests. And as we saw, both these sides, these advising sides, don't necessarily want to work with each other. But Baghdad is learning it needs both to a certain degree, and it's trying to walk a line somewhere in the middle.
Well, thank you very much for that. That was a very interesting insight in what we've actually learned from the Battle of Tikrit. Thanks for joining us. And if you want to read more about this or other issues, please visit stratfor.com.